You're swimming about 100 meters offshore near Whangarei, New Zealand. The water's so clear you can count the pebbles on the bottom. It's an ordinary training swim, nothing more. Then a pod of dolphins comes barreling straight at you, faster than you've ever seen them move. They box you and three other swimmers into a tight cluster, slapping the surface with their tails, circling for almost 40 minutes without a break. Your first thought is that something's wrong with them, that maybe they're agitated. Maybe you've wandered too close to a calf. You have no idea what's actually happening. Not until a 2-meter shadow slides past the exact spot where you were just standing, low and silent along the sandy bottom. That shadow is a great white shark. If you already believe animals look out for each other, this is the proof you've been waiting for. If you think nature only rewards the selfish, this sounds like a coincidence dressed up as a fairy tale. Here's the strange part. Both sides are looking at the exact same event. They're just reading it in opposite directions. Here's a number that turns this from a nice story into something you can't wave away. In 2016, marine biologist Robert Pittman and his team pulled together 115 documented cases of humpback whales charging in to break up killer whale attacks, gathered over 62 years of sightings. In almost 9 out of 10 of those cases, the animal being saved wasn't even another humpback. It was a seal, a sea lion, once even a giant ocean sunfish. In some cases, a single humpback swam nearly 2 kilometers alone just to throw itself into the middle of a pod of killer whales that outnumbered it many times over, and the standoff dragged on for almost 7 hours. Picture it this way. Every mammal is born with something like an emergency exit wired into its brain, a door that lets it risk itself for another species. Under normal conditions, that door stays bolted shut, and it only swings open in the rarest, most extreme circumstances, usually when survival instincts get triggered by accident. Most animals will go their entire lives without that door ever opening once. But somewhere in history, one animal found a way to pick that lock permanently, turning something that almost never happens into something that happens every single day in millions of living rooms at once. What flipped that switch? So here's the question this whole video is built around. Helping another species is the exact same act in both cases. So why is it rare enough in the wild that scientists have to build entire research papers around it, and yet so ordinary in your living room that nobody bothers filming it anymore? A lot of people assume animals help other species because they're unusually smart, capable of reasoning the way we do. That's not quite right, and it's worth correcting early. Mike Heithaus, a biology professor at Florida International University who studied several of these dolphin rescue cases, points out that most of them don't require any special intelligence at all. What's really happening is a maternal protection instinct firing at the wrong target. A mother dolphin is wired to shield her calf from danger, and when something like the scent of blood in the water triggers that instinct, it fires off anyway, even when the thing it ends up protecting is a person instead of her own calf. Here's the first of 3 reasons wild cross-species empathy is real, but stays rare. Reason 1 takes you right back to Whangarei. Researchers at the University of Haifa described this exact circling behavior as identical to how a mother dolphin shields her own calf from a predator. The only difference here is that the calf, this time, was a group of human swimmers. Reason 2 is Pittman's study of 115 encounters. His theory is that humpback whales carry a strikingly simple reflex. Hear the sound of a killer whale attack and go break it up because humpbacks themselves are frequently hunted the exact same way. They don't have time to check whether the victim is one of their own or a seal before committing, and the cost is real. Lost energy, lost time, sometimes real physical injury. Reason 3 happened off the coast of South Africa in 2019, where documentary filmmakers captured drone footage of 3 orcas driving off 2 great white sharks that had been stalking 5 surfers. Watch the footage and it looks like a heroic rescue, the ocean's biggest predator stepping in to protect a handful of strangers paddling on boards. But here's the catch. Long-term data from that same stretch of coastline tells a colder story. Whenever orcas show up in the area, great white shark attacks on prey drop by more than 90% year after year. That's not kindness. That's one apex predator eliminating competition for food the same way one gang might push a rival gang out of its territory. The surfers just happened to be standing in the blast radius of a turf war they never knew was happening. And here's the twist that flips the entire story on its head. In 1959, in Novosibirsk, geneticist Dmitry Belyayev started breeding silver foxes on a fur farm, and in every single generation, he kept only the calmest ones around people, ignoring every other trait, ignoring size, ignoring coat quality, ignoring everything except how relaxed each fox stayed near a human hand. In under a decade, the new generation of foxes wasn't just friendlier toward humans. Their ears started flopping like a puppy's. Their tails curled up over their backs. Patches of white showed up in their fur where there'd never been white before. Nobody selected for any of that. Nobody was breeding for floppy ears or curly tails. Selecting for just one trait, tameness, dragged a whole cluster of unrelated changes along with it, for free. Here's why that happens. In 2014, 3 researchers, Adam Wilkins, Richard Wrangham, and Tecumseh Fitch, proposed an explanation that's easier to follow than it sounds. During early embryo development, the same small cluster of cells shapes how fearful an animal grows up to be, and also shapes its ears, its tail, and its coat color. So when you breed an animal to be less afraid of people, you're not just adjusting one behavior. You're accidentally turning down the volume on its fear response toward almost everything unfamiliar, not just humans. This is where 3 reasons for the domesticated side show up, and they're backed by just as much evidence as the wild side. Reason 1 comes from 2015, when scientist Miho Nagasawa published a study in the journal Science showing that when a dog stares into its owner's eyes, the owner's oxytocin levels spike, the same bonding hormone that surges between a mother and a newborn. Here's the detail that makes it more than a cute fact. When the same experiment was run with wolves raised by humans from birth, that loop never showed up. Simply growing up around people isn't enough. It takes generations of actual domestication to build that wiring in. Reason 2 is that same fear response dial from the fox experiment, and it doesn't turn down only toward humans. It turned down toward anything unfamiliar, including other species entirely. That's why a house dog can lie still while a stray kitten nurses from a bowl beside it. Or a horse will let a chick build a nest on its back, moments so ordinary now that nobody calls them news. Reason 3 is simply how easy this all is to find. In the wild, it took 62 years of patient collecting just to reach 115 cases worth publishing. In a domesticated household, the same basic behavior happens every day, no cameras required, no research grant needed. Just one dog and one unfamiliar cat. But here's a second twist, right around the point where you'd expect this story to be over, and it complicates the whole idea of who cares more. If your dog's kindness toward another species is really just a side effect of humans breeding out its fear, is that still empathy in any meaningful sense? Or is it closer to a lock that was broken open from the outside, rather than a door the animal chose to open itself? Meanwhile, a humpback whale, risking real injury for a stranger, is doing something nobody engineered it to do. So the question of who cares more was never the right question to ask. These are 2 completely different trade-offs, not a competition. A humpback whale pays with energy, time, sometimes real injury, in exchange for an act it chose entirely on its own, with no human ever shaping that instinct into existence. Your dog barely pays anything at all for its kindness toward other species. But the price was already paid long before it was born by hundreds of generations of ancestors that people quietly selected, one litter at a time. Now go back to the water off Whangarei. All 4 swimmers made it to shore. The shark moved on. The pod of dolphins scattered like nothing had happened at all, drifting off to whatever dolphins do next, with no idea they'd just become a story people would still be telling decades later. Right now, not far from wherever you're listening to this, millions of dogs are lying next to millions of cats in millions of houses, and nobody's filming it, nobody's writing a paper about it, because to them, it stopped being remarkable a long time ago. One side of this story is a miracle so rare that it took the scientific community 62 years just to gather enough examples to prove it's real. The other side is something you walk past every day, on a couch, in a kitchen, without ever realizing it took tens of thousands of years of quiet breeding to become boring. So the real question was never which species loves harder. The real question is this: which part of your own kindness is something you'd still choose to pay for, and which part is just a setting somebody else installed in you before you ever got a say?